Hello, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Omoli, and welcome to the Grow Design Podcast. I'm here with,
Any. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast.
yeah, it's good to be back again. Yeah, on today's episode, we have a very interesting guest, and she's not just a guest to us, she's a good friend of the podcast because she's a returning guest. Really, I think she's one of those guests that we love to talk to a lot. I will allow Ran to intro herself. Hi, Ran. Good to meet you again.
Hi, Emmanuel. Hi, Inni. Nice to talk to all of you again. So, if you're listening, my name is Ran, and I am a product designer with a specialization in growth. And for the past a little bit over a decade, I've worked at companies of very various sizes, from Adobe to Amplitude, Webflow, and Shopify. And most recently, I am the founding designer and head of design at a data infrastructure startup called Gable.ai. And I'm also a host of my own YouTube channel and podcast called Ran Talks Design.
Yeah, definitely. I listen and watch most of your videos and really love them. All right. Today we're going to be talking about metrics that matters, designing signal through the growth funnel. If you've ever struggled to find or even influence metrics as a designer, I mean, this episode is for you. And I'm really excited for Rand because I know she's able to really do justice to this topic. So let's dive into the first section, why metrics matters and why should we as designer so much care about it. So before we zoom in into the different maybe activation or any of the code funnel, let's talk about the big picture. Today, designer shapes outcomes, and outcomes need signals. And when your world is full of dashboards, reading data, and probably data points, how do you then know what specific metrics actually matters? So, Ran, your experience is so expensive. Like your experience from Amplitude to Webflow, and you also started as a software engineer, then you moved into product design, ended up landing in code design apparently. So what drew you to design or from engineering, and how does metrics be a central theme of your work?
Yeah, definitely. So I did start my career as a front-end engineer. I worked as a web developer for a couple years on the East Coast of the United States. But really quickly into my job, I realized that I was craving a lot more creativity and more influence on the product itself, not just building a front-end piece. So that took me back to my time studying human computer interaction in grad school. So I thought about why I loved that experience so much and realized that I loved thinking through not only the building of a prototype of product, I also love thinking through the why of a product and how the user experienced it and how we can make it meaningful for people, things like that. So that's when I realized I really want to work at product design because it's like the perfect marriage of my system thinking, problem solving tendencies from my engineering background with my love of creativity and user empathy. So it's like the perfect home for me. And once I made the switch, I never looked back. So with that said, from day one as a designer, I just had this instinct to go look for more evidence on how I'm doing as a designer because I am looking to doing research. I think that might also come from my academic background because when you're doing writing an academic paper, you do literature review. So you're literally boiling the ocean to find whatever you can on this topic to educate yourself. And then at the end, you want to validate your assumptions and you want to show proof that what you're doing is working. So I'm looking to that in my day-to-day design work, and looking at data is just the natural next step for me.
And yeah, I like the phrase you used about how you're literally trying to boil the ocean to find things that will work. And I mean, I'm wondering about your experience with it being such an expansive one. Was there a specific moment or project where you then realized, like, oh, metrics is not something that we live up to PMs or to data analysts to sort out. Like designers can be fluent in this and ideally should be fluent to a large degree on metrics.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that designers should be fluent with metrics and data analytics. It shouldn't be just for PMs or analysts. For me, there weren't this revelation, right? Like I need data, like as I mentioned, it's kind of just the analytical nature of me, like looking for validation, and I tend to look for it. But it's really hard as a designer because if you worked at a more traditional organization, you might not have the ready access to data. Like I started my design career like really looking for anything I can get to look at things. Like I didn't have data until like I joined Amplitude, where I'm just in an ocean of data, and then I get overwhelmed. That's another story. So I think it's helpful to think about the benefit of metrics and data in two ways. So there are two types of metrics. One is the business outcome metrics, and those are the what we say, like usually what we say when we're referring to metrics like your retention, your revenue, like all the big things people care about. And then there's the second type of metrics. They're the behavior usage metrics. Those are the like lower level, your clicks, your scroll, your skips, like exit, like things like that. So they're both very useful for designers. So first of all, for as designers, like we often hear that like we struggle to get a seat at the table. And I think the reason for that is we couldn't really prove or have a way to speak about our ROI of our work and why design is valuable to the business. But if you can demonstrate that your design change, like you launch a feature and you measure this business metric improved, or better yet, you launch an A/B test where the only delta is your design change. There's nothing else changed in the experience. You can prove that it is your design change that's moving this business metric in a positive way. And then you won't have an issue, have a seat at the table anymore because it's like very obvious. And that's a language that your leadership, your business would easily understand as well. So that's for the outcome metrics. And then for the behavior usage metrics, they're just really golden. It's really helpful for designers. Your business leaders might not care about them. Like they don't care about clicks and scrolls, but we do. Like a Webflow, if you use Webflow before and you know the onboarding flow is extremely long. It's longer than my preference for sure. So it's like 30 steps plus. We look at the drop off step by step. We have to do it in 3 different amplitude charts because there's too many steps. And we look at which steps has higher than usual drop off rate. And those are really useful signal for us to look into what happened in that step. And that would not, like, that's not an information you can easily get from other methods like qualitative. Because sometimes like we find bugs where users might enter a very rare edge case. And those are really hard to produce in usability testing because with a small sample size, you might not encounter that at all. So that would give us like an additional lens, just help you design better.
Yeah, that's really spot on. So you mentioned three types of data, like you talk about behavior and let's say business outcome, right? So let me just paint a scenario, right, so that I could land this question properly. Maybe this will suit things more for early stage startups, right? For who don't have like a large base. Normally, in a growth team or in a growth squad, you definitely have maybe working with PMs, head of growth, who will normally set up the metrics and give you more emphasis on what metrics matters, right? In a scenario where you're a designer, a growth designer, and you're working with a small early stage startup and you want to start inculcating the habit of working with metrics at your work or in your workflow. Now, what's your process for uncovering maybe 1 or 2 metrics that really matters to what you're working on as a designer?
First of all metrics matter. right? Like
Mm.
for a business to be healthy and surviving and thriving, you want all of your funnel metrics to be good. Like you don't want to over optimize for acquisition and tank retention, for example. So everything matters, but the question should be, instead of which metrics matter, but also which metrics should we prioritize right now? Because based on your business, like you might want to focus on different things at a time. So to do that, I think that one easy way to do that is look for all of your funnel metrics. Start building out a funnel, kind of like your parametrics, and see where you have the biggest gap. I have a great example to share. You're gonna be surprised. So at Webflow, our users often monetize before they're activated.
Mm.
What do you mean?
Yeah. So it means people would often pay for Webflow from the get-go, or like they will pay for a Webflow subscription before they even learned how to use Webflow. It's not just for Webflow. I see very similar things at Shopify. So merchants would pay for Shopify's subscription. They would pay for the tool, especially they were doing $1 for 3 months. So the entry is really low, and people would buy the product without knowing how to use it. And then eventually they didn't publish their store, or they wasn't successful as an online merchant. Where for a Webflow case, they wouldn't be able to know how to use Webflow and really be successful at it. So if like conventionalism, it would be like, oh, monetization is always more important. But like for Webflow, the activation was actually the most urgent metric to work on.
Okay, so just to touch on that, so what you're saying essentially is that looking at the growth from the funnels, and look at what part of the funnel is most important to the business at that time, and you being able to prioritize it more. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you explain it, right? But I'm also wondering, was it something that your team figured out from the get go that, oh yeah, or was it like you saw the money rolling in and thought, great, and then you realized, oh, hang on a second, there's something wrong with this picture. I'm just curious, how did you land on that?
Yeah, so that was the prioritization was actually done before I joined.
Okay.
So my offer letter literally says we want you to come work for us on activation. So the goal was set, which is very like it's what a good product leadership team should do, which is find out the biggest problem and prioritize that.
So with Webflow, there's a lot of like user journeys that exist within that product. You've got the professionals, you've got people who are hobbyists, people who are just dabbling in and out. How have you, or how were you able to define what metrics would work across these different user journeys, and what signals helped you with validating those metrics?
That's a great question. Okay, for the next 3 hours, we're going to dive in.
That's scary.
Yeah, so finding our activation metric was actually a really long journey that multiple team has worked on. So like there was a interim growth team before we built out our like real growth team. And they started the work and we carry on the baton, and it lasted many months, many generations of designers and PMs and data scientists. So usually I think in the industry, we tend to oversimplify activation. Like we would either think of it as, oh, it's activation means user completed the onboarding flow, like the tooltip or tour, whatever you have. But that's an oversimplification of that. Like a tooltip like tour can only get you so far. It just watched your tutorial doesn't mean the user is ready to recognize your value and ready to go. And I think the Reforge version of activation is when user first feel the value of your product, like they experience the aha moment. I think that might work well for most of the tools, but for very complex like pro tools like Webflow, I think activation actually come after the aha moment. In our foundational user research, we watched a lot of people using Webflow like for the first time, and we realized that they actually experience multiple aha moments, like when they preview and when they see they can just drag and drop the viewport to preview their site, and that's like aha moment. When they see, like sometimes when developers see Flexbox, they're aha. Like we see multiple of that. But then that doesn't mean that they are gonna be successful of using the product, because it is a little bit of reach if you use Webflow before, especially for non-technical designers, who is our core target user. So that's a long backstory, but we set out on a journey to like figure out what should we use for define our activation. The first version of the definition is published site. So if a site is published and with 10 or more unique visitors in a month, and we consider that's a success. That is a really good proxy for value, I think. So if you publish a site, you're probably really successful. And then, especially if you share it with other people and have 10 or more unique visitors, that's a pretty good indicator of success, user success, right? The problem with that is that metric is very, very lagging. If you're building a website, chances are it takes a month at least. More often it's like 2 or 3 months. And that means every experiment, we need to let it run for 2 to 3 months at a time before we can like call the experiment, make decisions. And that's just not gonna work for a growth team, because we're expected to move fast and to make decisions and learn really, really fast. So that's why we really wanted to find a leading indicator, which is something that people do early on in their user journey that's somehow predictive to the outcome. So that's mostly a data science heavy lifting. So we relied on our data science team a lot, and we ended up landing on a metric called initiate build. And the definition for that is the user needs to start 3 or more build events in 15-minute time periods, and we need 6 of those active building time periods. That's why I said it needs 3 hours, because it's very complex.
Yeah.
And I would take questions.
I have a lot of questions.
I know.
Because I'm literally taking notes and I'm like, okay, trying to connect everything, but they're right.
No, yeah. I mean, I imagine it's the same questions you've got. What constitutes a build event? Why is
Exactly.
it 15 minutes window? And then you said there are like 6 of those. Like, what
Yes.
does that mean?
Yes. So that's our scientific way of simulating when a user started actively building their site. So first of all, we separate, so like your segment event, amplitude mix, kind of like these user behavior events, we separate them into 2 buckets, active events and passive events. So for active events, there are adding element onto canvas, drag and drop, tweak CSS, change layouts, these like valuable like building events. That's what we call the build event. And then the passive event could be just page load, or like you change a setting, or like you preview, things like that. So those are just less important in terms of effort. So that's how we qualify the events. And then the second part is our attempt to cater to how users are using Webflow. Because you mentioned earlier, like the user base is really expand. Like people use Webflow in very different ways. So you could be a pro, like agency or in-house designer. That's your full-time job. You just work on it for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So those you will work on the building for like hours at a time in one session. And then there are weekend warriors or side hustlers. They do a little bit every night after work. maybe just an hour, maybe even half an hour. So we want to kind of capture this and be flexible. That's why we came up with the 6 time periods. So all you need to do is it can be within the same session. So you can hit that really quickly for a pro user. So if you build for what's 6 times 15? So you can build that amount of time in one setting. And I'm not very good at doing math at 7 a.m. I apologize. And then you could do that like over 6 days. So it can be 6 different sessions. And to account for like edge cases, like someone just leave their browser open for a long period of time, we added the qualifier. You have to do at least 3 events in this 15-minute period to qualify for active build. Is it perfect? Probably not. And it's a mouthful to like, you need a presentation before you like tell people about it. But I think it works, and we validated it, and the majority, like on historical data, so the majority of people who qualify for this metric would end up activate, like meaning publish a site in the future. So that's the leading indicator that we were used during my time at Webflow.
Love that. I've got a follow on, which kind of tucks on into the next section, but I'm wondering, in the process of like setting that up and figuring all that chunky data together, I wonder, did you discover like downstream effects that you did not account for originally that made you go back and say, oh, whoa, this is something we want to be very careful of? And yeah, how did you think through that?
Yeah, so one, like we made sure that we did rigorous data science validation to make sure that this is a predictive indicator of the future. So we think it's in the threshold of acceptable threshold. So that's good enough metric. And if you're talking about like long term, like would it cannibalize like retention or revenue? We use those for each experiment we run. We have a set of guardrail metrics, which for us is retention and monetization. We want to make sure whatever we do doesn't drop those also key metrics.
Yeah, to be fair, I think I actually have I still have question around that. So you mentioned some very interesting sort of like user segmenting in terms of okay, the weekend users, the active users and everything. Now, how are you guys able to work with the customer segmentation in such a way that it doesn't really affect the activation metrics in itself, right? So you have I mean, this is a complex topic to be fair, because when you look at how you guys went from just publishing site from the first metric, which is like a published site with 10 users, right, to being able to now talk about initiate build event, right, having 3 or more events or build event done in like 15 minutes, right? So which means so if I'm a user and I'm only using it weekends, I'm still captured in it. So how were you guys able to bring in this user segmentation into the activation metric? Like how you were able to okay connect it together? Because I think that really plays a lot in these all activities. I don't know if you understand my question.
Yeah, is the question on how do you track a complex metrics like this?
Yes, yeah. How do you track it and also don't lose sight of some of the users that might not be power users, but then they use the product, but they are not like everyday users, like weekend user, like someone like me. I only use Webflow maybe when I want to publish my website, but then does that mean I'm not activated? So how are you guys been able to connect those things together?
Yeah, so like there's no perfect metric, right? Like the reason why it's so complex is we really tried to capture most of the activated users. So in your case, I think unfortunately to Webflow, like at least dashboards view, you would not be activated user because there is a time period. So if you don't use it frequently in the first 7 days, I think that's the time period we decided on, 7 or 15 days. So if you spend it out for longer, we probably won't count you as activated. So you would be like a false negative. But that's okay because we do think the majority of successful users activate or like learn when they just join the platform. So the first 7 days is really important. 7 to 15 days is really important. That's when your motivation is the highest, your momentum is the highest. And if you didn't build a lot, it might be likely this is not very important to you, right? Or it might be likely that you just forget about it, and it does create negative, like false negative like that. But we think that's a minority of the case.
Okay.
And just to clarify that, we do still track the activation metric. So the site published is still our North Star. It's just we use this leading indicator to call experiment. Now we can call experiment within 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So we can make a decision on if this is good or not. And then we still let the experiment run for 3 months to collect the publish metric. That's how we like measure our success as a growth team.
If we look at your entire experience, Ran, like you've worked across different types of growth models, sometimes in self-serve, sometimes sales-led. When you look at how your design approach have adapted to each of these growth models, sometimes there are funnel stages that you had a chance to influence more. Sometimes you have to influence less, depending on the growth model. Can you talk to us about what that experience has been?
Yeah, I'm gonna oversimplify this a little bit. So I'd say in general, as a designer, you have a much bigger impact if you work in a self-serve PLG company. Because like when you do PLG, you realize the entire company realize your product is your like growth engine, right? So you need a good product to win in the competitive market. So companies tend to have a culture to focus more on product, on UX. So you just have an easier time to advocate for things, and you just naturally have the influence. So that was like just naturally easier. And in sales led works, like work at Amplitude. Amplitude was sales led. I completely missed the PLG transition and working with Elena Verna. I'm kicking myself. Biggest regret. Hashtag. And then like for now, like Gable, heavy sales led enterprise, just sales call the shot. So in that case, I think there's a sales loop that's happening. So a lot of times you can still design features that your customer want. So instead of like maybe less of the, I will remove friction, have people move like smoother between stage, that could be less important because oftentimes your users are not your buyers. Like buyers are leadership and then users are the individual ICs that are working on the team. So, but if you design new features that's highly desirable and it demos really, really well, it will give you a lot of influence and your sales team is going to love you and you're going to be their BFF. So that creates a really positive loop for you. So create features that's desirable and you prove value by bringing in more deals and the sales team consider highly of you and you can advocate for improvement on that feature. So that would be very easy. And then you will also bring in more revenue, right? And then you hire more sales teams. And then you have a better relationship with sales teams. And then they give you insights on what other features that you can build to kill it. So it's better than a lot of designer imagined. Like if the sales, the design doesn't matter, design does matter. And I do think it's a good idea if you work at a sales led organization, be the BFF with your sales rep.
Yeah, good. I think I would ask like a very simple question, right? On that note, what would be sort of your advice for companies that sort of run on sales led right now? And most people think about it's not really ideal to maybe have PLG or something. But what would be your advice if you're a designer working in a sales led framework and you are seeing the opportunities? Like, oh, the company is missing out chunkly on probably on SMBs because nobody want to sit for 3 4 days on demo calls, but they want to take action immediately. If you're a designer on that kind of team, right? How do you want to influence the, will I say, the laying of the PLG or the self-serve initiative on top of that sales-led model, and how can you do it effectively without breaking silos?
Yeah, so it depends. So sometimes it's really hard to switch your business model right away. Like I understand a lot of us want, we should do PLG. I do want a PLG for Gable, but unfortunately, I just don't think it's the right thing to do for the company at the stage at the, like with our resources. So sometimes you have to really align with the timing as well. But let's say if the timing was right, it was a good idea. I think the key is to really build a strong case. Like you should not just say, I want to do PLG, let me. Like it's very likely that they won't let you do that, right? If it's that easy, everybody would be doing it. So do your homework first. Look at the data. Like what evidence can you can you show to support your claim? Get feedback. If you don't have data, gather feedback from sales. So if you are in sales led, like talk to sales. They should be a partner, not not enemy. So work with them, work with your customer success, talk to call up some small business owners, right? Like your clients as their customers, and gather like a whole case and present it to your leadership and go from there.
So, all right, let's switch into talking about metrics, from metrics that matter, this big one, and like what happens as the company grows. Like we already know that when product maturity starts to set in, sometimes your metrics evolve. And what worked in early growth stage does not necessarily mean it's what's going to work in the scale up phase or in the much larger ops phase. So, across the different points where you've been, have you, first of all, been in an experience where it was slightly earlier in the journey and things evolved as the company got bigger? And if you have, at what point did you then experience a scenario where a metric had outlived its usefulness? And what tipped you off? What were the signals for that?
Yeah, first I want to say it's very normal for your metrics to be stale. Like ideally you should be reevaluating, are you working towards the right metrics all the time, like every quarter or every 6 months to a year, for sure. I have like a slightly different but related example when sometimes you realize that your metrics are not serving you. Like for example, at Amplitude, like a lot of times, like you try to quantify a desired behavior that's not like black and white, like acquisition, conversion, or revenue. It's hard, like the assay of activation metric at Webflow. Like Amplitude will have similar things. We're trying to figure out what value means. Like because we still want to have a successful product even though we were sales led. So we had many evolutions of our value metric, or like our North Star metric. I remember one of the earlier version of the metric that my friend Jenny worked on, like it's really like too low of a level. Like they were measuring the clicks on search when they're working on search, for example. And that is just too low of a level of a metric to work towards, because if you're a designer and you're trying to optimize for click, there's very easy things you can do to get all clicks, which the result that she ended up shipping was like a big giant search bar. Like think Google homepage, and she removed everything else and just a search bar with two giant arrow pointing at it. Like, and then you can't do anything but follow the arrow and click on the search. I can talk about this because she shared openly in her talk. So there's like no shade on whatever. She made fun of herself. Yeah, so that's very obvious example of your metric is that there's something wrong about it. Like a more sophisticated example that I heard was from Casey Winters. He shared early Pinterest. One of their metrics they're trying to optimize is called repinner and clicker. So number of people who repin and click. Did you spot the problem with this one? So the click action is much easier to achieve than repin, because repin is sharing in a certain sense. You have to feel like the content is good and it represents with my brand and I share. So what end up happens is the team over optimizing for one of the two metrics, and they over optimizing on click, and then that leads to clickbaity tactics, and that's not really driving the desired behavior for the company. So when you realize something go wrong like this, it's very important you revisit your metric. And it's okay. Like, we are all learning. No metric is going to be perfect. So you just learn and refine over time.
That's good. Okay, this very short question, just as a follow up, right? What do you look for in a good growth metrics, and how do you pressure test it?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, for a good metric, it needs to be simple and easy to understand. And that's my biggest complaint with the Webflow activation metric. We tried. We just couldn't get to a simpler version at the time. And like a textbook example is the magic Facebook metric, right? Led by Shema. 7 friends, adding 7 friends in the first 10 days of using. That's a really easy aha moment, value indicator. And I think that's what a Facebook team aligned and worked towards until their first 1 million MAUs. So something small, something simple and easy to understand. It's important to me. And also, it needs to be a leading indicator. You need to be able to call your direction fairly early, like in 2-3 weeks of time instead of 3 months. So avoid revenue retention, these lagging indicators. And then you need for it to be actionable. For example, at Amplitude, we often have like activated organization or activated account metrics, but you can't influence an account. That's just not something you can directly influence. But for the users in the account, you can. So I think they ended up shifting it to shared learnings. So they were actually influencing the users that's actually using Amplitude and have them share their dashboards and reports with other people. So that's a much more actionable metrics than activated account.
Okay, so we're gonna take this to like the career perspective. We've heard so much about metrics and dug in deep, but let's talk to designers, right? Sometimes you find yourself in ambiguous or execution heavy roles that can feel disconnected from meaningful outcomes that are actually affecting growth. And that's also been your experience. You've referenced that before. When you find yourself in those scenarios, how do you reclaim the influence? How do you reclaim influence when your work isn't clearly tied to some funnel that you can say, oh, hey, here is the direct correlation between the delivery of the work and the business outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's very normal. Unfortunately, it's not like just you or me. I think all of us experience at some point in our career, like we want to have more impact, influence, but then the organizational culture is not set in a way that set us up for success. So it's a balance, right? So one is, I think you have to decide at some point if you or like your team, like a small group of people, you would have the influence ever to make this change and in a reasonable time frame. So it's really hard to influence things, and especially mature organizations, because everything is established. They move slower, and then you have more stakeholders, and things just happen slowly. So are you okay with trying to influence being your top of mind for the next 3 years, for example? At one of my previous jobs, we were trying to run more experimentation. It takes like 6 to 8 months for us to run the first experiment. And that's not big experiment, just like a button change experiments. So it takes us like 6 to 8 months to establish a norm on we should run one experiment and then run one every 2 weeks. Not like very small ask. took really long time. So are you okay with that? Is that aligned with where you want in your career progression? So that's one question. And if you do decide you want to try it and influence culture, and because there is reward that's going to come with like having grit and stick it out with problems, because once you get it solved, you might like reap like disproportionate results and growth from that. So it is a question to ask yourself, like, is the culture open enough for me to change in the foreseeable future? If you do want to change, I would start really small. Build a case, do your homework, find your allies, and all the good stuff that, like, we all know.
Great. When you are in a situation and you have been sort of positioned to sort of shipping more of output other than an outcome, right? Because as growth designers, we are being taught to position ourselves to design for outputs other than and to design for outcomes other than outputs. So, in this scenario, how do you start shifting conversations that allow you to design more for outcomes, right? In a scenario where leadership or the company has been structured for you to be stuck in shipping, how do you really push this narrative or this conversation in a way that allows you to ship for outcome?
Yeah, I think I'm personally really lucky. I'm lucky enough that most of my organization I work for do value outcome over output. So I'm very grateful for that. If I were to join an organization that focus more on the output side, I would probably start showing the outcome of your output. Like
Mm,
if you look at, so for the past quarter, we shipped this 5 features. None of them increased anything. And when you present that gap to people, and the leadership would, of course, start thinking about, oh, shoot, like we just wasted a quarter. Like, what
mm.
else can we do to actually move these needles? Just change their mindset a little bit like this. You might need to do it multiple times, like in front of multiple people, but I don't think that's a hard transition.
Yeah. I mean, if you show and don't tell, I think that's what I could capture from it. So instead of telling them, "Oh, this could drive this could drive that," just show them. That would be a very way to convince leadership from doing that same amount. So, yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to career signals about like we're still talking about this execution shaping culture. What are the career signals that you look for that has helped you decide when to move on from a place to another or when to, like you said, just have some grit and stick it out?
I have to be very honest that I'm not great at the sticking it out portion earlier in my career. Part of it is like I like to optimize. I like to move fast. So the moment when I stop learning, when I feel like I'm wasting my time, and earlier when I was more junior, I'm a lot sharper, like more immature in a way that I just like it's my way. Like of course I'm right, and like why are you giving me so much resistance? I'm wasting my time. And I didn't value these managing your stakeholders, influence the culture, and doing this type of work. And I get older, I start to value that a little bit more, and I'm more patient with a toddler. That definitely increased my patience by a lot. So all of these factors make me start to think maybe there were cases in my early career I could have stick it out. Because if everything was right, like you like the team, they are curious and open and humble, like it's very like you could easily, not easily, but you could influence things. So in that case, I think you could give it a try. But if it's a very like hostile culture that you just don't see a future of you having any influence, I think that might be a signal for you to consider a different opportunity. And another one that I always use is if I stop learning anything new. Like sometimes you just find your days is on repeat. It's a lull. So you just doing the same thing over and over again and talking to the same people over and again. And that's a like a signal that maybe you want to move on if you want to still grow in your career.
At what point in your career did you work at a place that you feel like, everything all clicked. And what made the season a bit different? Now, I don't want to mention name of brand, so I will allow you to tell us which of them really clicked for you. And just a follow up, and for some of our listeners, kind of searching for the same sort of clicking, what are the signal they should look out for or look out for in their next team they're joining?
Yes, for me, culture is very important. I want the company culture to align with what I value. I mentioned a little bit earlier, like curiosity, openness, it's important. So for like, I enjoyed like tremendously both my time at Amplitude and Webflow. Like I have great team, great culture, and we believe in very similar ways that how we should build product and what is right. So the principles and values should align. And you can have different opinions, but if you have an openness and curious like culture, it's doable. Like you can talk about things and you can hash out your difference. So that just makes the communication and collaboration so much easier.
Thank you so much, Ran. This has been a very detailed conversation about metrics.
I hope it's not too detailed. I apologize if that's the case.
No apologies to be fair, because I think that's the goal of this drops for us. We want experts' perspectives on certain topics, and we want it to feel like deep dives that people can really go away feeling like they've learned something new. For example, with the Webflow activation metric, for example, right? You did say like ideally the metric should be something simple.
Yes.
It's not the case in reality
Yeah.
sometimes. And when that's not the case, how do you work around it? How do you still find the value, and how do you solve for it in your work? So this has been fantastic. All right, we're gonna go through something we're calling the learning corner, which is getting to know you a little bit better, but not from like personal questions. It's more still related to the work that we do as graphic designers. Okay, so what is one underrated metric that you think way too many teams overlook?
I think engagement, because like we focus on all the retention, the revenue, and all of that is again lagging. It comes from engagement. If you don't have engagement, chances are you won't have any of the things you desire. Like it's really bad if someone is locked into an annual subscription, like this script, for example. Like I'm logged into an annual, but then I don't like to use it. So if you don't measure engagement, you won't find out until my contract expires, like much later. I think the problem why people don't measure that is, again, like activation, engagement is very hard to measure.
I reckon that can easily be tied to the next one, which is like more for designers in particular. What growth flywheel stage should designers pay more attention to?
Like we definitely have the biggest impact in like as a product designer on the engagement piece, but I'd say all of them. I think designers don't think about funnel stage, flywheel, loops enough. Like anything, I take anything, just pick something and work on it.
Okay, what's the first thing you ever designed?
Okay, so the technical first thing I designed is my portfolio as everyone else, but that's not interesting. What I want to share is my first. It's a crappy portfolio. Like I didn't came from fine art. Like I came from computer science, but it's on GitHub. You can still dig it up, I think. I want to share my first professional design product. I'm actually very proud of it. It's one error message.
Okay.
I didn't even have to design the UI. It's just one message. And I learned a lot of lessons from it. I'm very proud of it. I
What did
remember.
you say?
So it's an error for Marketo when you have too, like the activity threshold exceed or something. So I started, my proposal was something like that. And then my boss at the time was like, are you a robot? Like we don't speak like this. So we ended up go with too many activities. So simple, but it taught me a lot of lessons. I think it's actually harder to speak human, especially in enterprise software.
Yeah. Okay. Dream project if time and money were no object for you.
I want to start my own company. Yeah, I want to try put all my knowledge into the reality and just do it myself.
Design founder incoming.
Interesting. And just curious, if you were to start a company, are you looking at products or consultancy or like what aspects?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was talking about a product. I want to try to build a useful product for a group of people. It's very vague. Clearly, I'm not ready for it. I mean,
Ran is like
it's
the
not.
definition of stealth right now.
Yes, I'm just gonna build something for some people.
Okay.
Definitely, definitely.
It's
I
gonna
mean,
be B2B, I think.
Wait,
yeah,
are you averse to B2C or it's just because of your experience?
I think, yeah, experience is one thing, and I definitely find B2C as brutal. It's a red ocean right there. And I think you have a lot better chance if you go with B2B, like where the need is very clear. You can find the pain, find the need, like propose a solution and see, go from there.
Interesting.
amazing.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Ran.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a very, very wonderful episode, and thanks so much, Ran, for sharing with us your time and your knowledge. And I mean, this is going to be part of the drop for metrics based, and I think everybody that listened to this episode will be going on with something. Personally, I'm going on with two or at least 3 points. So, thank you so much, Ran, and how do we end the episode again?
Yeah. Till next time.
Thanks, guys, for joining us today. We catch you up in the next one.
All
All
right.
right, bye,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.